The bridge of the Harmony's edge was quiet except for the soft hum of machines and the gentle clicking sounds that Captain Zethkar made when he was thinking. The tall, crystal-like alien stood at the center of the command deck, his transparent body catching the light from the stars outside. His ship was huge, almost like a floating city, and it carried people from 12 different worlds who worked together to explore the galaxy. Commander Lisa Hayes sat at her station, watching the screens that showed nothing but empty space. She was the only human on the ship, which made her feel lonely sometimes. The other aliens were nice enough, but they all seemed afraid of her species. Humans had a bad reputation in the galaxy. Most aliens thought they were too violent and unpredictable to be trusted with important jobs. The peace was broken when the communications officer, a blue-skinned creature named Veltar, suddenly made a sharp whistling sound. All the lights on? His console started flashing red. "Captain," he said in his musical voice, "we have an emergency signal coming in from the Kepler system." Captain Zethkar moved closer, his crystal feet making tiny ringing sounds on the metal floor. "What kind of emergency?" Veltar pressed some buttons, and the main screen filled with static. Then a voice came through, but it was hard to understand because it kept cutting in and out. "This is ... mining colony? Kepler 442b? Under attack. Something terrible ... They're everywhere ... Please help us." The voice was high and scared. Lisa recognized it as belonging to a Xanthari, one of the peaceful mining people who lived on that planet. The Xanthari were known throughout the galaxy for being gentle and smart. They could dig tunnels through solid rock with their bare hands and find valuable minerals that other species missed. But they had no weapons and no soldiers. They had never needed them before. "Try to clean up the signal," Captain Zethkar ordered. Veltar worked on his controls for a few minutes. The static got quieter and they could hear more of the message. What they heard made everyone on the bridge feel cold inside. "The black things came from underground," the Xanthari voice said. "They eat everything they touch. Our tools don't work against them. Our people are ... No, they're coming back. Send help." "Send anyone. They're spreading through the tunnels and we can't stop them." The message ended with a horrible scream. Lisa felt her heart beating faster. She had heard stories about things that came from underground and ate everything in their path. There was only one species that matched that description, and it was something that gave nightmares to every intelligent being in the galaxy. "Computer," she said, "run a scan on that signal. Check for biological markers associated with Void Swarm." Activity. The ship's computer made some beeping sounds while it worked. After a moment, a cold mechanical voice said, "Analysis complete. Signal shows evidence of Void Swarm biosignatures. Confidence level, 97%. Every alien on the bridge made different sounds of fear. Some gasped, others hissed, and a few started shaking. The Void Swarm was the worst thing anyone could imagine. They were like a living nightmare that spread from planet to planet, eating everything alive and growing stronger with each world they destroyed. Dr. Finn Carter, the human scientist who studied dangerous alien life forms, hurried onto the bridge. He was a thin man with messy brown hair and thick glasses. "I heard the alert," he said. "Is it really them?" Lisa nodded. "The computer confirms it. The Void Swarm has found Kepler 442b. Finn's face went pale. "How long ago did this message come through?" "The signal delay suggests it was sent 14 hours ago," Veltar reported. "Then it might already be too late," Finn said quietly. "The swarm can consume an entire colony in less than a day once they get established." Captain Zethkar began pacing back and forth, his crystal body flashing different colors as he thought. This was a sign that he was very worried. "What are our options?" he asked. His military advisor, a large creature covered in green scales, spoke up. "Captain, our peacekeeping forces are not equipped for this kind of threat. The Void Swarm has never been successfully fought using conventional methods. Every time someone tries, they just make the swarm stronger by feeding it more biological matter. What about evacuation?" asked Dr. Whisper of Stars, the representative from the Ethereal Collective. She was a being made of pure light who could barely be seen except for a faint glow in the air. Impossible, Finn said, shaking his head. The swarm will have surrounded the colony by now. Nothing gets in or out once they establish a perimeter. The Zenthari are trapped. The bridge fell. Silent, everyone knew what this meant. The mining colony was lost, and there was nothing they could do about it. In a few days, the Void Swarm would finish eating everything on Kepler 442b and then spread to other worlds. It was a disaster that could affect millions of lives, but Lisa was thinking about something else. She remembered reading reports about the only time in galactic history when someone had successfully fought off a Void Swarm attack. It had happened on a small research station near the edge of known space. The creatures had been defeated, but the details of how it happened were classified at the highest levels. She knew who had been responsible, though. It was a human military unit that had been in the area by accident. They had saved the research station, but their methods had been so violent and destructive that the Galactic Coalition had banned them from ever operating in civilized space again. "Captain," Lisa said slowly, "I might have an idea." Zethkar stopped pacing and turned to look at her. His crystal body flashed bright blue, which meant he was listening carefully. "What kind of idea?" "There is one military force that has successfully defeated the Void Swarm before. They're not part of the coalition, and they use methods that most species consider too dangerous to allow. But they get results when nothing else works." The green-scaled military advisor made a growling sound. "You're talking about human special forces? Absolutely not. They're banned from coalition space for good reason. They cause more destruction than they prevent." "That's not true," Lisa said, feeling angry. "They cause exactly the right amount of destruction for the job they're given. The problem is that most people can't tell the difference between controlled violence and random chaos." Dr. Whisper of Stars floated closer. "Commander Hayes, are you seriously suggesting that we contact Earth's military? Do you understand what you're asking?" Lisa stood up from her chair. "I'm asking you to let me save the Zenthari colony. The Void Swarm is going to spread to other worlds if we don't stop it here. How many people are you willing to let die because you're afraid of the only species that knows how to fight these things?" Captain Zethkar was quiet for a long moment. His body cycled through several different colors as he considered the options. Finally he spoke. "What exactly would this human military unit do that our forces cannot?" Finn answered before Lisa could speak. "They fight the swarm using tactics that the hive mind cannot understand or predict. The Void Swarm adapts to logical military strategies within hours, but humans don't use logical strategies. They use approaches that seem insane to every other species, including the swarm." "That's exactly why they're dangerous," the military advisor growled. "They don't follow rules. They don't care about civilian casualties. They turn every battle into total war." "But they win," Lisa said simply. "When the choice is between total war and total extinction, which would you choose?" The bridge fell. Silent again. Outside the windows, the stars continued to shine peacefully, unaware of the terrible decision being made inside the ship. The fate of an entire world hung in the balance, and the only possible salvation came from the most feared species in the galaxy. Captain Zethkar's body flashed one final time before settling on a steady white glow. "Commander Hayes," he said, "contact Earth. Tell them we need help. Tell them we need their most dangerous people." Lisa felt a chill run down her spine. She knew exactly who Earth would send, and the thought of them being unleashed in coalition space terrified even her. But the alternative was worse. The Void Swarm had to be stopped, no matter the cost. She reached for her communication controls, knowing that she was about to change everything. Lisa's hands shook as she entered the communication codes for Earth's Special Operations Command. She had never used these codes before, and she hoped she would never need to use them again. The signal would take several minutes to reach Earth, and then several more minutes for any reply to come back. During that time, the Zenthari colony was getting closer to complete destruction. Captain Zethkar called for an emergency meeting in the main conference room. Representatives from all 12 species aboard the Harmony's Edge gathered around the large circular table. The room was designed to make everyone feel comfortable. with different types of lighting and atmosphere controls for each species, but today nobody looked comfortable at all. The first to speak was Ambassador Whisper of Stars from the Ethereal Collective. Her light form flickered with agitation as she spoke. Captain, I must protest this decision in the strongest possible terms. Humans are banned from coalition military operations for 17 different violations of galactic warfare conventions. They do not distinguish between combatants and civilians. They use weapons that are considered too cruel for civilized warfare. They turn every conflict into a bloodbath. The representative from the Mechanical Syndicate, a robot called Unit Prime 7, added his voice to the protest. My calculations show that human military involvement increases the probability of total planetary destruction by 347%. Their tactics are so unpredictable that they often cause more damage than the original threat. Dr. Kelthmer, a tall alien with purple skin and 4 arms, leaned forward. He was the Coalition's leading expert on dangerous alien species, including the Void Swarm. I have studied every recorded encounter with human military forces. They do not follow any recognizable patterns of warfare. They seem to actively seek out the most dangerous possible approach to every situation. Lisa listened to all the complaints, but she noticed that Dr. Finn Carter was preparing to speak. He had been studying the Void Swarm longer than anyone else in the galaxy, and she hoped he would support her decision. Finn stood up and activated a holographic display in the center of the table. The display showed a 3-dimensional map of a space station that looked like it had been through a terrible battle. Parts of it were missing, other parts were covered in strange black growths, and the whole structure looked like it might fall apart at any moment. This is Research Station Beta 7, Finn said. 3 years ago, it was attacked by a Void Swarm force. The station had a crew of 230 scientists from 8 different species. Standard Coalition emergency protocols called for immediate evacuation, but the swarm had already surrounded the station. No ships could get in or out. The holographic display changed to show the interior of the station. The corridors were filled with the black, web-like growths that the Void Swarm used to spread through structures. In some places, the growths were so thick that they completely blocked the passages. The Coalition sent a peacekeeping force to attempt a rescue, Finn continued. 47 ships with the best equipment and training we had available. They followed standard anti-swarm protocols, established defensive perimeters, and began systematic clearance operations. Unit Prime 7 nodded approvingly. Standard procedure, logical and efficient. The entire peacekeeping force was destroyed in 6 hours, Finn said quietly. The swarm learned their patterns, adapted to their weapons, and overwhelmed them completely. We lost 47 ships and over 3,000 Coalition personnel. The holographic display changed again, this time showing a small human military vessel approaching the station. The ship looked old and battered, nothing like the sleek Coalition vessels. 12 hours later, this ship arrived. It was a human patrol craft that had been in the area by accident. 5 crew members, all human military personnel. They had no knowledge of standard anti-swarm protocols. They had never fought the Void Swarm before. They had weapons that were considered obsolete by Coalition standards. Ambassador Whisper of Stars flickered brighter. What happened? They won, Finn said simply. In 4 hours, they had cleared the entire station and rescued all surviving personnel. 193 people were saved. The Void Swarm was completely eliminated. The conference room fell silent. Everyone stared at the holographic display, which now showed the research station after the human rescue operation. The structure was badly damaged, but it was clean. All the black growths were gone. How? Asked Dr. Kelthmer. Finn shook his head. The details are classified, but I can tell you this much. The humans did not follow any recognizable military doctrine. They split up immediately, which should have been suicide. They used their own weapons against themselves in several cases. They deliberately put themselves in impossible situations and then found ways to turn those situations into advantages. That sounds insane, said the military advisor. Exactly, Finn replied. The Void Swarm's hive mind is incredibly intelligent. It can analyze and counter any logical military strategy within hours. But it cannot understand strategies that are fundamentally illogical. Human military thinking is so different from every other species that it represents a completely new category of tactical approach. Unit Prime 7's lights blinked rapidly as he processed this information. You are suggesting that human irrationality is actually a strategic advantage? I'm suggesting that what we call irrationality might actually be a form of logic that we don't understand, Finn said. Humans have been fighting wars for thousands of years on a planet where everything was trying to kill them. They developed ways of thinking about combat that no other species ever needed to develop. Lisa's communication console beeped, indicating that a message was coming in from Earth. She looked at Captain Zethkar, who nodded for her to proceed. The main screen filled with the image of a man in a military uniform. He was older, maybe 60 years old, with gray hair and scars on his face. His eyes were the kind that had seen too many terrible things, but they were also sharp and intelligent. "This is Admiral Jack Morrison, Earth Special Operations Command," the man said. "I understand you have a Void Swarm problem." Lisa stepped forward. "Admiral, we have a mining colony under attack." "The situation is critical," Admiral Morrison nodded. "I've reviewed the initial reports. Kepler 442b Xanthari colony approximately 8,000 civilians. The swarm has been active for about 16 hours now. Can you help us?" Captain Zethkar asked. Morrison smiled, but it was not a pleasant smile. "Captain, I have exactly the right team for this job. They're currently on standby because they're too dangerous to deploy anywhere that isn't already a complete disaster." "Your situation qualifies. Who are they?" Lisa asked. "Sergeant Danny Rodriguez, former Special Forces, specializes in impossible extractions. Kate Sullivan, demolitions expert. She's banned from using explosives on 17 different worlds. Lieutenant Ben Parker, sniper. His psychological profile is classified because it scares other humans. Maria Santos, combat medic. She's kept people alive in conditions that would kill most aliens just from the stress. And their leader, Colonel Ryan Mitchell." Morrison paused, and his expression became even more serious. "Colonel Mitchell is the reason we have regulations about human military involvement in coalition space. His tactical innovations have been studied and feared across multiple star systems. He's also the only person who has successfully defeated the Void Swarm on 3 separate occasions." Ambassador Whisper of Stars flickered nervously. "Admiral, what guarantee do we have that your people won't cause more damage than the swarm itself?" Morrison looked directly at her, even though he couldn't actually see her through the communication link. "Ma'am, I can guarantee that my people will cause exactly the amount of damage necessary to complete their mission, no more, no less. The question is whether you're more afraid of controlled human violence or uncontrolled alien extinction." The conference room was quiet for a long moment. Finally, Captain Zethkar spoke. "How quickly can your team be deployed?" "They're already on their way," Morrison said. "I started the deployment as soon as I received your message." "They'll reach Kepler 442b in 18 hours. "You deployed them before we agreed to accept help?" Unit Prime 7 asked. Morrison's smile became even less pleasant. "Son, when the Void Swarm is involved, there's no time for committee meetings. My people are going to save that colony whether you want them to or not. The only question is whether you want to work with them or get in their way." The communication ended, leaving the conference room in stunned silence. Lisa realized that the decision had been taken out of their hands. The most dangerous humans alive were already on their way to Kepler 442b, and there was nothing anyone could do to stop them. The planet Kepler 442b looked like a nightmare from space. What had once been a beautiful world with green forests and blue oceans was now covered in patches of black that spread like an infection across the surface. The Void Swarm had been busy during the 18 hours since the distress call, and their terrible work was visible even from orbit. Colonel Ryan Mitchell stood in the cargo bay of the human transport ship, checking his equipment one final time. He was a tall man with dark hair and cold eyes that seemed to see everything at once. His team was gathered around him, each person preparing for what everyone knew would be either a perfect mission or a complete disaster. "Listen up," Mitchell said to his team. "The situation down there is exactly what we trained for. The swarm has taken over most of the mining colony, but our scans show life signs in the deep tunnels. Some of the Zenthari are still alive, but not for long." Sergeant Danny Rodriguez looked up from his weapons check. He was a stocky man with quick hands and scars on his arms from previous missions. "How many civilians are we talking about, Colonel?" "Approximately 3,000 survivors out of the original 8,000, Mitchell replied. "They're trapped in the lower mining levels where the swarm hasn't reached yet. But that won't last. The creatures are digging new tunnels every hour." Kate Sullivan, the demolitions expert, grinned as she packed her explosives. She was a small woman with red hair and a smile that made other people nervous. "What's our insertion plan? Please tell me we're not doing anything boring like a standard drop." "We're going to do something that will make the coalition observers think we've lost our minds," Mitchell said. "We're inserting directly into the largest concentration of swarm entities on the planet." Lieutenant Ben Parker looked up from his sniper rifle. He was thin and pale, with the kind of quiet voice that made people pay attention. "That's suicide, sir, even for us." "Only if we were planning to fight our way out," Mitchell replied. "But we're not. We're going to make the swarm come to us, then use their own behavior against them." Maria Santos finished packing her medical supplies and joined the group. She was a tough-looking woman with steady hands and eyes that had seen too much pain. "What about the civilians? How do we get them out while we're playing games with the swarm?" Mitchell activated a holographic display that showed the colony from above. The black growth of the swarm covered most of the surface structures, but the underground mining tunnels were still partially clear. "Danny, you're going to take a separate route through the old mining shafts. Your job is to reach the survivors and keep them alive until we can clear a path for extraction." "And how exactly are we going to clear a path through thousands of swarm creatures?" Danny asked. Kate's grin got wider. "Leave that to me. I've been wanting to try some new explosive combinations that are technically illegal in civilized space." "What's the plan for dealing with the hive mind?" Ben asked. "Every time someone fights the swarm, it learns from their tactics and adapts." Mitchell's expression became serious. "That's why we're going to use tactics that it cannot possibly understand. We're going to operate as 5 separate units with completely different objectives. We're going to make decisions that contradict each other. We're going to turn this entire operation into controlled chaos." The transport ship shuddered as it entered the planet's atmosphere. Through the small windows, they could see the black growths getting larger and more detailed. The swarm had built huge structures that looked like twisted buildings made of bone and metal. Smaller creatures moved between these structures like ants in a colony. "Insertion in 2 minutes, the pilot announced over the intercom. Mitchell looked at each member of his team. "Remember, once we hit the ground, we operate independently. Don't try to coordinate with each other. Don't try to follow standard tactical procedures. Trust your instincts and do whatever feels right in the moment." "Sir," Maria said, "the coalition observers are going to think we've completely lost our minds." "Good," Mitchell replied. "If they can't understand what we're doing, then neither can the swarm." The insertion pods launched from the transport ship like missiles aimed at the planet's surface. Each pod was designed to look like a meteor, and Kate had rigged them with explosive charges that would create even more confusion when they landed. Colonel Mitchell's pod crashed through the roof of what had been the colony's main administration building. The structure was now covered in the black, web-like growth that the swarm used to convert buildings into part of their hive. As he climbed out of his pod, dozens of swarm creatures immediately surrounded him. The creatures were horrible to look at. They had started as different types of aliens, but had been changed by the swarm into something that was part machine and part living tissue. They moved with perfect coordination, like parts of a single organism, because that's exactly what they were. Instead of trying to fight his way out, Mitchell did something that no sane military officer would ever do. He sat down in the middle of the swarm creatures and started sorting through his equipment as, if they weren't there, the creatures stopped moving. The hive mind that controlled them had never encountered this behavior before. They were programmed to respond to threats, to prey, to attempts at escape, but they had no programming for someone who simply ignored them completely. While the swarm creatures stood around him in confusion, Mitchell calmly assembled a communication device and began broadcasting on multiple frequencies. He wasn't calling for help or trying to coordinate with his team. Instead, he was reading poetry 3 kilometers away. Kate Sullivan's pod landed in the middle of the swarm's main breeding facility. The creatures there were larger and more dangerous than the ones Mitchell had encountered. With weapons that could cut through military armor like paper. Kate immediately started running, but not away from the creatures. She ran deeper into their facility, toward the most dangerous areas she could find. As she ran, she dropped small explosive devices that were timed to go off in seemingly random patterns, but the patterns weren't random at all. Kate had calculated exactly when and where. Each explosion would occur to create a chain reaction that would collapse specific parts of the facility's structure. The swarm creatures chased her, thinking they were herding prey into a trap, but they were actually helping her position the charges exactly where she needed them. Lieutenant Ben Parker's pod landed on top of one of the swarm's communication towers. The structure was partially dissolved by the creature's acid, making it unstable and dangerous. Any normal sniper would have immediately moved to safer ground. Instead, Ben set up his rifle on the swaying, corroding platform and began taking shots at targets that seemed completely random. He wasn't aiming at the most dangerous creatures or the most important structures. He was shooting at small, seemingly insignificant things that caught his attention, but each shot was carefully planned. Ben understood that the swarm's hive mind would try to analyze his targeting patterns to predict his next move. By shooting at things that had no tactical value, he was feeding the hive mind information that would make it focus on protecting the wrong targets. Sergeant Danny Rodriguez took a completely different approach. His pod landed far from the main swarm activity in an area that looked almost normal except for the eerie silence. He immediately began moving through the abandoned mining tunnels, using routes that the swarm hadn't discovered yet, but Danny wasn't moving quietly or carefully, like a normal infiltration specialist would. He was making noise, leaving obvious signs of his passage, and even stopping to eat a meal in areas where swarm creatures might find him. He wanted them to know he was there, but he wanted them to be confused about what he was doing. Maria Santos landed her pod directly in front of the colony's medical center, which was now covered in swarm growth. Instead of avoiding the dangerous area, she walked straight through the front door and began setting up a field hospital in the lobby. The swarm creatures in the building watched her with confusion as she arranged medical supplies and started treating wounded Zenthari civilians who had been trapped there since the attack began. She worked calmly and efficiently, ignoring the creatures that surrounded her above the planet. The crew of the Harmony's Edge watched all of this through their sensors with growing horror and disbelief. "They've lost their minds," Ambassador Whisper of Stars said, her light flickering with distress. "They're not following any military protocol. They're going to get themselves killed and accomplish nothing." But Dr. Finn Carter was studying the sensor readings more carefully. "Wait," he said. "Look at the swarm's movement patterns. They're not attacking the humans. They're not adapting to counter their tactics. The hive mind is confused?" Captain Zethkar leaned forward to look at the displays. "What do you mean?" "The swarm can't understand what the humans are doing," Finn explained. "Their behavior is so far outside normal tactical thinking that the hive mind has no response protocols. It's never encountered anything like this before." The confusion in the void swarm lasted exactly 47 minutes. Then something changed. The hive mind stopped trying to understand what the humans were doing and decided to simply destroy them with overwhelming force. Massive creatures began emerging from underground chambers that no one knew existed. These were not the converted aliens that had been seen before. These were pure swarm creations grown specifically for war. They were the size of buildings, with armor that could stop spaceship weapons and limbs that could tear through solid rock. Colonel Mitchell watched the first of these creatures break through the ground near his position. It was huge and black, with dozens of eyes and mouths that opened and closed like breathing. Spikes covered its body, and each spike dripped with acid that could dissolve metal in seconds. Instead of running away, Mitchell stood up and walked toward the creature. He was still reading poetry over his communication device, but now he was also singing. His voice was terrible, completely off-key, and he was mixing songs from different human cultures in ways that made no sense. The giant creature stopped moving and tilted its massive head to one side, as if it was trying to understand what it was hearing. The smaller swarm creatures around Mitchell also stopped and started making strange clicking sounds that they had never made before. Meanwhile, Kate Sullivan's explosives began going off in sequence. But instead of destroying the swarm facility the explosions seemed to be rearranging it. Walls collapsed in specific patterns, floors opened up to reveal hidden chambers, and the acid pools that the swarm used for digestion started flowing in new directions. Kate was running through this chaos, but she wasn't trying to escape. She was actually moving deeper into the facility toward areas that were becoming more dangerous with each explosion. As she ran, she was throwing grenades behind her, but these weren't normal grenades. They were devices she had made herself that created different types of explosions. Some of the grenades released clouds of gas that made the swarm creatures move more slowly. Others created electromagnetic pulses that confused their communication systems. A few released a chemical that smelled exactly like the pheromones that swarm creatures used to mark their territory. The result was complete chaos in the facility. Swarm creatures started attacking each other because they couldn't tell friend from enemy. The hive mind tried to regain control, but every time it sent new orders, Kate's next explosion would disrupt the communication network. Lieutenant Ben Parker was having his own strange success on the unstable communication tower. The platform was swaying more violently now, and parts of it were dissolving under his feet, but he continued taking carefully aimed shots at seemingly random targets. His bullets weren't normal ammunition either. Ben had loaded his rifle with rounds that contained different chemicals, each one designed to affect the swarm in a different way. Some bullets released toxins that disrupted the creature's nervous systems. Others contained viruses that attacked their ability to share information with the hive mind, but the strangest part was that Ben wasn't shooting to kill the creatures. He was shooting to change them. Each bullet was designed to modify the swarm's behavior in small ways, making them more aggressive toward each other, or more likely to ignore orders from the hive mind. The communication tower finally collapsed, but Ben didn't fall with it. At the last second, he jumped onto one of the flying swarm creatures that had come to investigate his position. The creature was confused and disoriented from the chemicals in his bullets, so instead of attacking him, it started flying in random directions. Ben rode the creature like it was a wild animal, using his rifle to steer it by shooting at other creatures that got too close. From his new mobile position, he could see the entire battlefield and continue his work of turning the swarm against itself. Sergeant Danny Rodriguez had reached the trapped Xanthari civilians in the deep mining tunnels. There were almost 3,000 of them, including children and elderly individuals who were too weak to move quickly. The tunnels they were hiding in were the deepest and safest parts of the mine, but they were also the hardest to reach. Danny found the survivors huddled together in a large chamber that had been used for storing mining equipment. They were scared and hungry, and many of them were injured from the initial swarm attack. When they saw a human warrior covered in weapons and scars, some of them became even more frightened, but Danny surprised them by sitting down and offering to share his food. He spoke to them in their own language, which he had learned during the trip to their planet. His voice was gentle and calm, completely different from what anyone expected from one of Earth's most dangerous soldiers. "I'm here to get you out," he told them. "But we need to do this carefully. The creatures above us can feel vibrations in the ground, so we have to move in a special way. Danny began organizing the civilians into small groups, with the strongest individuals helping the weakest. But instead of leading them directly toward the surface, he started taking them deeper into the mine. Following tunnels that led away from the colony, this seemed like the wrong direction, but Danny knew something that the swarm didn't. The mining operation had connected to natural cave systems that extended for hundreds of kilometers underground. By going deeper first, he could reach caves that the swarm hadn't discovered and then circle back toward the surface from an unexpected direction. Maria Santos was performing medical miracles in the converted hospital. She had not only treated the wounded Zenthari civilians she found there, but she had also started treating injured swarm creatures. This was perhaps the most insane thing that any of the humans had done. The swarm creatures were supposed to be her enemies, but Maria was using her medical knowledge to repair damage they had sustained during the fighting. The strange part was that it was working. The swarm creatures she treated became confused about whether she was a threat or not. Some of them started protecting her from other creatures that tried to attack the hospital. The hive mind couldn't understand why some of its creatures were defending a human, so it started sending conflicting orders that made the situation even more chaotic. Maria discovered that her human medical knowledge actually applied to swarm biology in unexpected ways. The creatures were partly organic, and the organic parts followed biological rules that she understood. By treating their injuries, she was also learning how to create targeted treatments that could disrupt their connection to the hive mind. She began mixing medicines that would help the wounded creatures heal, but would also make them more independent and less likely to follow orders. Each creature she treated became a small disruption in the swarm's perfect coordination. The battle reached its turning point when Colonel Mitchell decided to implement the most dangerous part of his plan. He contacted his team members and told them to start working against each other. "Danny, I need you to set charges that will collapse the tunnels Kate is trying to keep open," he ordered. "Kate, I want you to target the communication arrays that Ben is using for navigation," he continued. "Ben, start shooting at the medical supplies that Maria needs for her work," he added. "Maria, I want you to treat the creatures that are hunting." "Danny," he finished. To anyone watching, it looked like the human team had lost their minds completely. They were sabotaging each other's missions and making it impossible for any of them to succeed, but this was exactly what Mitchell wanted. The Void Swarm's hive mind was trying to understand the humans by analyzing their actions and predicting their goals. When the humans started working against each other, the hive mind's analysis broke down completely. The swarm couldn't understand how a military unit could function. When its members had opposing objectives, it couldn't predict what the humans would do next because their actions seemed to contradict each other. The hive mind started making errors in its tactical decisions because it was trying to counter strategies that didn't actually exist. The result was that the Void Swarm, for the first time in recorded galactic history, began to retreat. The Void Swarm's retreat was unlike anything anyone had ever seen before. The massive creatures that had emerged from underground began pulling back into their tunnels. The smaller swarm entities stopped their coordinated attacks and started moving in confused circles. Some of them even began attacking the black growths that connected them to the hive mind aboard the Harmony's edge. The alien observers watched in stunned silence as their sensors showed the impossible happening. The swarm was not just retreating, it was falling apart. "This cannot be real," whispered Dr. Kelthmore, the Coalition's expert on swarm behavior. "In 300 years of recorded encounters, the Void Swarm has never retreated from an established position." Captain Zethkar's crystal body flashed through several colors as he tried to process what he was seeing. "Dr. Carter, can you explain? What is happening down there?" Finn Carter was studying the sensor readings with growing amazement. "The swarm's hive mind appears to be experiencing some kind of breakdown. Their coordination patterns are completely disrupted. It's as if they can't decide what they're supposed to be doing." "But how is that possible?" asked Ambassador Whisper of Stars. "The hive mind is one of the most advanced intelligence systems in the galaxy." "That's exactly the problem," Finn replied. "It's too advanced. It's trying to analyze and counter the Human tactics using logical processes, but the humans aren't using logic. They're using a form of strategic thinking that the hive mind cannot comprehend. On the planet's surface, Colonel Mitchell was putting the final phase of his plan into action. He contacted each of his team members with new orders that made even less sense than the previous ones. "Danny, stop evacuating the civilians and start teaching them to dance," he said into his communication device. "Kate, I want you to start building things instead of blowing them up," he continued. "Ben, put down your rifle and start playing music," he added. "Maria, stop treating injuries and start cooking food," he finished. These orders were so completely insane that even Mitchell's own team hesitated before following them. But they had learned to trust their commander's strange tactical genius, so they began doing exactly what he had asked. Sergeant Danny Rodriguez gathered the 3,000 Zenthari civilians in a large underground chamber and began teaching them traditional human folk dances. The Zenthari were confused at first, but they were so grateful to be alive that they were willing to do anything their rescuer asked. Soon, 3,000 aliens were stomping their feet and clapping their hands in rhythm while Danny called out dance instructions. The vibrations from all those feet created a pattern in the ground that the swarm had never encountered before. The creatures thought it might be some kind of seismic weapon and began retreating even further from the area. Kate Sullivan stopped using her explosives to destroy swarm structures and instead began using them to build new ones. She created controlled explosions that moved rocks and metal into artistic patterns. She built strange sculptures that served no military purpose, but looked beautiful in the sunlight. The swarm creatures watched in confusion as their enemy started creating art instead of destruction. The hive mind had no protocols for dealing with creative expression during combat. It tried to analyze the artistic patterns for hidden tactical meaning, but there wasn't any. Kate was just making things because they looked nice. Lieutenant Ben Parker climbed down from his flying creature and found a piece of metal that had been shaped by one of Kate's explosions. He discovered that when he hit it with his rifle, but it made a pleasant ringing sound. Soon he was playing simple melodies that echoed across the battlefield. The music was random and amateur, but it was also something the swarm had never experienced. The creatures stopped their attacks and began gathering around Ben to listen. Some of them even started making sounds that almost resembled singing. Maria Santos set up a field kitchen in the middle of what had been the most dangerous part of the colony. She began cooking meals using supplies she found in the abandoned buildings, mixing human recipes with Zenthari ingredients. The smells of cooking food attracted both human team members and swarm creatures. Soon, Maria had swarm entities lined up like customers at a restaurant, waiting for her to serve them food. She treated each creature politely, giving them small portions and asking if they liked the taste. Many of the creatures seemed to enjoy the experience of eating something other than the biological matter they usually consumed. The most remarkable thing was happening to the swarm creatures that interacted with the humans in these peaceful ways. They began to act more independently, making decisions based on curiosity rather than hive mind orders. Some of them started exploring the colony for reasons other than destruction. Others began communicating with each other in ways that didn't involve the Central Intelligence. Colonel Mitchell watched all of this happening and smiled for the first time since arriving on the planet. His plan was working better than he had hoped. The humans weren't just confusing the swarm's tactical analysis, they were actually changing the fundamental nature of the creatures themselves. The Void Swarm had always been successful because it turned everything it encountered into part of itself. But the humans were doing something different. They were turning the swarm creatures into something more like individuals, with their own thoughts and desires that didn't always match what the hive mind wanted. As the day progressed, more and more swarm creatures began disconnecting from the Central Intelligence. They removed the biomechanical growths that linked them to the hive network and started behaving like independent beings. Some of them began helping the humans with their various activities. By evening, the Void Swarm as an organized threat had completely ceased to exist on Kepler 442b. The creatures were still there, but they were no longer acting as a single entity. They had become thousands of individual beings, each making its own choices about what to do next. The evacuation of the Zentari civilians became a celebration instead of a military operation. The humans organized a massive party in the colonies. Main square with dancing, music, art, and food. Many of the former swarm creatures joined the celebration, contributing their own forms of artistic expression. Admiral Morrison arrived on the planet 3 days later to collect his team and assess the results of their mission. He found Colonel Mitchell sitting in a lawn chair, drinking coffee and watching a group of former swarm creatures paint murals on the walls of damaged buildings. "Mission report, Colonel," Morrison said. "Mission successful, sir," Mitchell replied. "The void swarm threat has been eliminated. The colony is secure. All civilians have been evacuated safely." Morrison looked around at the scene of former enemies, working together to rebuild the colony. "And how exactly did you accomplish this?" Mitchell shrugged. "We reminded them that there are more interesting things to do than just eating everything you encounter." The news of what happened on Kepler 442b be spread throughout the galaxy within weeks. For the first time in galactic history, a void swarm incursion had been not just defeated but completely transformed. The creatures that had once been the galaxy's most feared threat were now individuals capable of art, music, and friendship. The Galactic Coalition was forced to revise all of its protocols regarding both the void swarm and human military involvement. They established new categories for threats that required non-conventional tactical solutions, and grudgingly admitted that sometimes the most dangerous problems required the most dangerous people to solve them, but perhaps the most important change was in how the galaxy viewed humanity itself. The humans had proven that their reputation for violence and chaos was only part of the story. They were also capable of finding peaceful solutions to seemingly impossible problems, even if their methods seemed completely insane to everyone else. Captain Zethkar updated the Coalition's official records with a new entry. When facing threats that cannot be understood through conventional means, consider the possibility that conventional means may not be the solution. Sometimes the most dangerous humans alive are dangerous not because they destroy everything, but because they change everything. The Zethari survivors settled on a new world where they established a memorial to their human rescuers. But they also kept in contact with many of the former swarm creatures who had become friends during those strange days when dancing and cooking had saved the galaxy. And somewhere in the deep reaches of space, Admiral Morrison's communication systems continued to light up with requests from species that had previously banned human military involvement. The galaxy had learned that when the impossible threatens everything you hold dear, sometimes you need to call the people who specialize in making the impossible possible.